Good morning, everyone. As you can see, Kevin's not here today. And because of that, I've got a new respect for that man. There is a lot of work that he does that we don't realize. And you should thank him, especially after today, maybe.
And you're wearing a tie.
Yes. I have to talk to him about that. All right. We're going to be going, he's asked me to speak about the book of Joshua. And we've got a lot of chapters to go through, 2 through 6. And there is a lot of verses that I'm going to be throwing up on the screen. And she's going to be busy. She's going to be very busy. And I'll move this out of the way. I should have shaved. Okay, chapter 2, we're going to see what God does through for Rahab, or Rahav, but for the English, we'll call her Rahab. We'll see how God works through that for her. Chapter 3, we're going to see how God works through the crossing of the Jordan. Chapter 4 is talking about the memorial stones. Chapter 5 talks about the circumcision and the Passover of Gilgad. In chapter 6, we get to see God's wonderful works to the victory at Jericho for the Israelites. We get to see that happen. We get to see that in our lives too as we get started here. So with that, let's go ahead and pray just before we get started. Lord God, thank you for your word and your truth. Thank you that you want a personal relationship with us. Thank you that you work through each one of our lives personally. You know how to touch us, how to change us. And I thank you that we can read about who you are and what you can do through us. And all we got to do is take it. You have provided the victory for us, and all we have to do is act upon it. And I pray, Lord, that you would speak to each of us, that you would speak to us, speak to our hearts, that you would open our eyes, that we would see what you're trying to teach us and show us. I pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay. So chapter 2, the salvation of Rahab. So here Joshua sends out the spies to the city of Jericho. So chapter 1, Joshua sends forth the spies. And Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." And they went and came to the house of a prostitute, or a harlot, whose name was Rahav, or Rahab, and they lodged there. So it's important to know during this time that this all takes place during the 3 days Joshua has commanded the nation to wait at the banks of the Jordan. God has a special purpose for these 3 days while those spies are looking over Jordan. So the spies are now at Rahab's house. And in verse 1, he makes a statement, they came to the house of the prostitute whose name was Rahab. Through the history of Christianity, this story has been an embarrassment to some Bible interpreters, that these 2 spies went to a house of a prostitute. Some have tried to say that she was just simply an innkeeper, but the Bible's pretty clear. She was a harlot. She was a prostitute. And it's a neat example of how that reflects on us and how we are before we actually turn towards Christ. And yet God still found a way to save someone who was totally undeserving, or no one could actually see how someone like that could be saved. So in Joshua 2:7, Rahab hides and protects the spies. Verse 2 through 7. It was told to the king of Jericho, "Behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." The king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you. who entered your house, for they have come to search out the land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hid them. And she said, True, the men came to me, but I didn't know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I don't know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax. So flax, I didn't know what flax was, but this is garments. So she had stalks of garments lined up on the roof. I kind of imagine like, at Walmart or a Hobby Lobby where you can buy those sheets of cloth and stuff. So she had all those lined up there at the rooftop. And she had laid them in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. I didn't know what fords were either, but those were the crossings. That's where everything crossed at. So they pursued them all the way there at the crossing paths. And the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. So verse 4, but the woman had taken the 2 men and hid them. The Bible simply reports Rahab lied. Okay, and he's not condoning it, and he's not accepting it, but she lied, and maybe if she had thought about it more enough, maybe God could possibly have provided a way for her not to. But anyways, that's hearsay, but that's just a thought. But she lied, but also it shows the courage that Rahab had. She put her own lives on the line for these 2 men. All right, verse 8 through 14, Rahab's confession of faith. So before the men laid down, she came to them on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me that by the Lord, that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house. And give me a sure sign, and spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, Your life for ours, even to death, if you do not tell this business of ours. Then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Verse 9, I know that the Lord has given you the land. This surprise outburst of faith shows how God has a plan to bring Rahab and the spies together. This is the same kind of thing that we see when God supernaturally brings us to other believers or others that are open to the gospel. And also we get to see Rahab's declaration. He is a God in heavens above and on the earth beneath. It's proof of her faith. It's not a strong faith and it's not a perfect faith, but her faith is commemorable nonetheless. Hebrews 11:31. I'd like to show what Hebrews 3:1 has to say. Yep, next one, please. There we go. Thank you. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. And then James 25. In the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? We may be appalled in the fact that Rahab was a prostitute, or that she was a liar, but the fact is that she was not saved by her works, by her faith. She knew who God was, she knew who she was, and she trusted God for her very life. Verse 12 states, You will also deal kindly with my father's house. Shows that her love should be noticed, as well as her faith. Okay, now to verse 15:21. Then she let them down by a rope. So this is Rahab's salvation by the scarlet robe. rope. You can go to the next verse, please. Hopefully it's working. Well, we'll go ahead. Verse 15 through 21. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into a city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, Go into the hills of the pursuers, or go to the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go your way. The men said to her, We will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you had made us swear. Behold, when we come to the land, you shall tie the scarlet cord in the window, through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father, your mother, and your brothers, and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on your head. But if you tell the business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear. And she said, According to your word, so be it. Then she sent them away, and they departed, and as she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Okay, verse 18, tied the scarlet cord in the window. So this was a sign to the army of Israel that the people in this home was to be spared. Despite Rahab's desire, despite her faith, despite her promise of these spies, she would have perished unless she put her trust in that blood-red cord cast down from her window. Without the scarlet cord, she could not be saved. So as early as the first century, some commentators saw this scarlet cord as a symbol of the blood of Jesus Christ. I want to show to you Exodus 12:13. 12:13 in Exodus says, The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So here's a beautiful example that he's carrying it on all the way through all these stories that we've read, and he's still putting this together for all of us to see his work for us. Joshua would be a savior for Rahab, but a judge for the rest of Jericho. In the same way, Jesus is a savior for those who trust him, but a judge for those who reject him. So here's a beautiful story about Rahab's destiny. She was to marry one of the princes of Judah, and she would be found in the lineage of King David and the lineage of Jesus himself. So how neat is that? That's us, right? That's us. That's great. So there was another purpose at work in sending the spies to save Rahab. In this, we see the extent God goes to bring one woman, her father's house, to salvation, someone seemingly impossible to save. If you may know who seemed to be impossible to save, but God is not short to save people like Rahab or us or me. He can work in amazing ways to bring salvation. All right, chapter 3. This is the crossing of the Jordan. So God gives instructions for crossing the Jordan River. Joshua 3, 1 through 12. So here they are. They're camping at the riverside here at the Jordan. And Israel gets to face up to their own utter helplessness to accomplish what is set before them. So verse 1 through 2. Then Joshua rose up early in the morning, and they set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, and all the people of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp. So they came to the Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed over. God told the people of Israel to wait there 3 days at the shore of the Jordan River. Okay? All that time, the people of Israel saw a rushing river, swollen, overflowing their banks from the spring rains, lying in front of them. They must have asked, how can we ever cross this river? It was one thing for a few spies to try to make their way through that rushing river. But here, we're talking about a nation of millions with all their possessions. How would they make this happen? I want to give you a vision with this picture of what it could be like what they're facing. They had to sit there by the bank for 3 days, and they're trying to think, man, we're supposed to do what? and true, there was people that came out of Egypt that got to cross the Red Sea, and they were there, they knew. But then there was people, the young men and the women who didn't get to have that experience, and they're sitting there, I'm sure. It would be me, I was like, and we're supposed to do what? Is there a boat coming? So, anyways, but there is faith in the older men, in the elders. So this is where that all comes about. So we got to put our trust in God. So at a moment like this, all the wonderful talks about living in the promised land can sound pretty hollow when you're at this point. There are seemingly impossible obstacles blocking the way. How will God do this one? So I ask ourselves and myself, what is my Jordan? What is my Goliath? What is my Red Sea? Is it drugs? Is it alcohol? Is it porn? Is it anger? What is that we see that it's impossible for us? Joshua 3:5. This is the ark that God will lead the way. So 3:5. And they commanded the people, saying, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levite priests, then you shall set out from the place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. So a cubit's about 18 inches. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way that you must go, for you have not passed this way before. Then Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. So in those verses we read and we see that Joshua sent the priests who carried out the Ark of the Covenant, which was the visible representation of God's presence with the people. So as we face our Jordan, our Red Sea, our Goliath, alcohol, drugs, porn, anger, we need to put God before us. Just like this covenant was a sign that showed the people that God was with them. And God is in with us, right? And when we face these impossible obstacles, we need to put God before us so we can see the way. Because we don't know the way. And He has to lead us. So, yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by length. God required that they keep some 1,000 yards behind the ark. And for us football people, it's 10 football fields. For the runners, that's 0.56 miles. So a little over a half of a mile that they had to keep their distance from the ark. So this way everybody could see it. This was for two reasons. First, to respect the holy nature of the Ark of the Covenant, but also it was to make sure that everyone had a clear view of the ark, that you may know the way you must go. Shows that the Ark of the Covenant led the way. Israel would accomplish this impossible task as they set their eyes upon Israel would accomplish this impossible task as they set their eyes on God's presence and followed after His presence. Not their own, not my own, not your own, but His. Sanctify yourselves, because this would be a spiritual battle, and we all are under a spiritual battle every day. Joshua requires that the people have a spiritual preparation. Sanctify yourselves, meaning that they were to separate themselves from common things, to focus in on the Lord, and see that the Lord will do wonders among you. So as we focus on Him and put Him first, we get to see and watch the Lord do wonders among us. Verse 9:13, Joshua encourages the Israelites and instructs the Israelites. So 9 through 13. So Joshua said to the people of Israel, come here and listen to the word of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, that He will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Gerasites, the Amorites, the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, each tribe a man, and when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from the upstream shall stand in a heap. Verse 13, the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from the upstream shall stand in the heap. Joshua's general outlook, as communicated to the people, is refreshing. This impossible problem in their way are not seen as an oppressive trial, but as a glorious opportunity to see God's work. So, Kevin, every now and then, has people come up and give testimonies, right? And I've heard amazing testimonies from people who have shared their lives. And how encouraging and inspiring that is for me, and I'm sure for all of you, to see what God has done in the works of everyone who spoke, everyone even now. And as you share that, trust me, it's encouraging to us. It's encouraging to me. It's encouraging to people who are struggling at that point, because it lets them know that they're not alone, and they get to hear how God had worked through your life and how you put your trust in Him. That gives them strength and the courage to put their trust in Him and their faith into Him. Okay. Verse 15, the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped into the edge of the water. The priests began the procession with the ark of the covenant some 1,000 yards in front of the people, and the priests came and walked right into the river that looked like it was going nowhere. Just like the priests who stepped into the water in faith, we too must take action and step out in faith, right? We got to have our own involvement in it. We just can't sit back and let God do everything. He wants us to be involved. Verse 16 through 17, the Jordan is stopped and the people cross over on dry ground. So verse 16 and 17, the waters coming down from upstream stood and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zoran, and thus flowing down toward the sea of Arab, or the sea salt, or the Dead Sea, were completely cut off, and the people crossed over into Jericho. Now the priest bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people finished crossing over the Jordan. I want to show you a picture. So he talked about how the water was stopped in a big heap all the way to Adam. So there's the Dead Sea, and about 2 inches, there's Adam, the city of Adam. So as you can see, that's how far the waters were heaped up. There's Jericho, just, I don't know, what is that, a 1/4 inch from the Dead Sea? And that gives you an idea of where they were crossing over. So I just wanted to show, because I was wondering, where's Adam at? So anyways, there you go. How did it happen? What was the key to this amazing miracle? I want to point out and notice that the centrality of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. So the Ark is referred to 14 times in these 17 verses. This is all about trusting in God that they knew, right? So it's so important to put God before us when we're wrestling against the Jordan or the Red Sea or the Goliath. To face such impossible challenges in our lives, we must look into Jesus. He always leads us. Jesus is the fulfillment of the ark. He is Emmanuel, which is translated God with us in Matthew 1:23. Jesus has cleared the way to victory over all things, having disarmed principalities and powers. He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in the cross. It's Colossians 2 through 15. As we keep our eyes on our victorious Jesus, the river of impossibility will dry up. Memorial stones, chapter 4. So the crossing the Jordan River is finished, and the Ark of the Covenant comes from the midst of the river. Okay. 1 through 9. After the nation crosses over, God commands Joshua to set up a memorial of the crossing. In the verse it says, when all the nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel. So now Joshua's talking to these men, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder. So this is going to be a big stone. And take up each one of you upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. And the people of Israel did just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, just as the Lord told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. And Joshua set up the 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the covenant had stood. And they are there to this day. This may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come. So the purpose of the memorial stones was so that the people of Israel could teach their children about the great things God has done, so that the work of God could not be forgotten among the generations. We often fail in our trials of God. We often fail in our trust in God because we forget the great things He has done. And often the faith of our children is weak because we have never told how great God is and how real His working in our lives is. So we need to share that with our children to give them the strength that what God has done for us, right? We can't forget that. And we need to share that. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan. So not only did he ask the 12 people from the tribes to gather stones, he also gathered 12 stones of his own and put those in the river himself. So Joshua set up a pile of memorial stones in the very bed of the river of Jordan, so that when it was lowered in a season of drought, that those stones could be seen and would testify at the time that God had completely dried up the Jordan. So especially in a time of drought, we need to remember the great things God has done. Verse 10 through 18, the nation passed over, the priests came through, and the Jordan returns to its normal flow. 10 through 18, for the priests bearing the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell his people according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. The people passed over in haste, or hurriedly, or quickly. And when all the people had finished passing over the ark of the Lord, and the priests passed over before the people, the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the people of Israel, as Moses had told them. About 40,000 ready for war passed over before the Lord for the battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him, just as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. And the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests bearing the ark of the testimony to come out of the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. And when the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before. Verse 10 states, for the priests bearing the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished. So the priests stood with the ark of the covenant for the entire time it took the nation to cross over. This was the visible token of the presence of God. It had to remain in the river throughout the entire crossing. God has to remain through the entire crossing. God has to remain through your Jordan, your Red Sea, your Goliath. He's got to stay there throughout that whole time. because he's got to be there. He's got to allow it to be finished. So what do these stones mean? So it's easy for us to forget the great miracles God has performed on our behalf. We don't remember the past great works of God so that we can live in a dreamland of the past, thinking that the best days of our Christianity experience is behind us. We remember them as a point of faith so we can trust God for greater and greater works in the future because we have seen and experienced his past faithfulness. All right. So we're going to go to chapter 5, circumcision and the Passover at Gilgal. So the fear of Israel's enemies at the faith and obedience of Israel. 5:1. As soon as all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they had crossed over, their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. When our spiritual enemies see that we are trusting in God and we're willing to step out in obedience faith, even when it seems crazy, they instantly lose confidence in their battle against us. We may forget, but our spiritual enemies always remember that if God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. They know that when we are really trusting in God, their defeat is assured. We may forget, but our spiritual enemies, yes, I already read that, sorry. So verse 2 through 8, the circumcision of Israel at Gilgal. Okay. 2 through 8. At the time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives, a really sharp knives, and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gelebeth, Haratha, or the hill of foreskins. Ugh. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the males of the people who came out of Egypt, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness on the way after they had come out of Egypt. Though all the people who came out had been circumcised, yet all the people who were born in the way in the wilderness after they had come out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nations, the men of war, had come out of Egypt perished, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord. The Lord swore to them that he would not let them see the land that the Lord had sworn to their fathers to give to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So it was their children whom he raised up in their place, that Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. When the circumcision of the whole nation was finished, they remained in their place in the camp until they were healed. So that takes a while to get healed after that, at least 7 days, right? Joshua circumcised the son of Israel. The circumcision was always a powerful act of the consecration of God. In it, an Israelite said, I'm not like the other nations. I listen to God and do what he says I should do. It was stepping out in faith, obedience, and identifying yourself as one of the Lord's people. It was renouncing the flesh and the world. It was dying to oneself and living for God. So it was a visible reminder for those people. And there was an awesome person who gave me this great example. It was a visual reminder, so every time they whizzed, they knew who they is. Okay? It was a visible reminder. I love it. Okay. So God only asked this of them after he showed his greatness by the Jordan River's crossing. When we remember all the things the power of God has done in our lives, we are willing to trust him with a radical obedience. Verse 9, the effect. God rolls away the reproach. Verse 9 states, and the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. And so the name of the place is called Gilgal, or a rolling wheel. Wheel rolling to this day. So it's like the wheels started rolling. All right, here we go. So today I've rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. What reproach? What dishonor? This is their shame from Egypt, their shame from the degrading slavery. God called Israel, He called us, to a place where they saw themselves as they were in Him. By faith, they could see themselves as an obedient, trusting people, and to stop seeing themselves as they were in their slavery, in their bondage, in our anger, right? In our drugs, in our alcohol, in our, whatever that's we're wrestling and fighting against. He's calling us and breaking that shame that we had gone through and that we have chosen. Of course, this is the same work God wants to do in us, taking away the dishonor and shame of our previous sin and rebellion and seeing ourselves as who we are in Jesus. The third work at Gilgal, a redemption remembered. The Passover is celebrated looking back to the redemption from Egypt. Verse 10 through 11, while the people of Israel were encamped at Gilgal, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in the evening on the plains of Jericho. And the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes, and parched grain. Verse 10 states they kept the Passover. So the original Passover itself could never be repeated, but there was power in its remembrance. They were to always remember that they were a people delivered, and remember God's works of deliverance. In the same way, we are to be constant remembrance of our redemption at Calvary and live our lives in the shadow of the cross, right? So there's our everyday remembrance. We should live our lives, our obedience out of love because we want to, not because we have to. All right, the victory of Jericho, chapter 6. Instructions for the battle, 1 through 5. Now Jericho was shut up inside the outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I've given you Jericho into your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war, going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they come, a long blast with the ram's horns, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, every one straight before him. So the first verse states, now Jericho was shut up inside and out because of the people of Israel. We see God showing his people the battle has already been won. It was already given to them. Jericho itself was on full alert. From a human's perspective, this should be a hard, if not impossible battle. Yet from God's perspective, the battle was already over because he can say to Joshua, I have given Jericho into your hands before they even done anything. Jericho was not an exceptional large city. It was an important, formidable fortress city. If Israel could defeat Jericho, they could defeat anything else that they could face in Canaan. Again, we see the wisdom of God in opposing to human wisdom in that Israel faces their most difficult opponent first. Verse 5, the wall of the city will fall down flat, meaning under itself. And the people shall go up, every one, straight before him. It was a plan for victory whereby it was clearly be the work of God, yet God gave them something to do so that Israel could work in partnership with God. So this is obvious. This is something that God could have done without Israel's help, okay? But he wanted them to be part of his work. He wants us to be part of his work, right? 6 through 7, Joshua tells the priests and the people. So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said to the people, go forward, march around the city and let the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord. So take up the ark of the covenant. Again, this was a visible sign that God was with them. The ark would be prominent in this victory. Even as it was in the crossing of the Jordan River, Israel had to keep their hearts and their minds on the Lord who was present with them, instead of putting their hearts and minds on the difficulty of the task in front of them. Verse 8 through 14. This is the march for the first 6 days. And just as Joshua had commanded the people, the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram horns before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets, with the ark of the covenant of the Lord following them. The armed men were walking before the priests, who were blowing the trumpets, and the rear guard was walking after the ark, while the trumpets blew continuously. But Joshua commanded the people, "You shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout." So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going about at once. And they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. Then Joshua rose up early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. And the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns blew before the ark of the Lord, walking on. And they blew the trumpets continually. And the armed men were walking before them, and the rear guard was walking after the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets blew continually. And the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did this for 6 days. So I want to show you a picture. This is what they had to walk around, at least what they dug up, and this is what they think this is what Jericho looked like from the archaeological diggings that they found. Looks like there's a ramp. Well, that is a ramp. It's called a revetment, and that revetment was made to keep the dirt in because they would build cities on top of cities. And then after they built that revetment, they put the gray brick and mortar wall up. So they would have to come up that revetment, and then they would have to try to get over the wall. So this is just kind of let you know what they were passing around 6 days in silence, and how 40,000 of those men had to walk around. So it took endurance and faith for Israel to do this. This march was for 6 days, and they had to persist in something that didn't seem to make sense. Also want to note that, right, everybody crossed over the Jordan. Millions of people, the women and children, right? So how do you keep the women and children quiet? Well, they weren't there. They weren't walking around. This was the armed men that was going to battle against this. So in this, the helplessness of Israel was revealed. Through 6 days of silent marching, they had a good look at the wall that seemed to be impenetrable, right? They knew that this was a bigger battle than they were. So there's another picture. This is kind of a visual on what it would look like, possibly. The army, God's covenant, the presence, the ram horns. Just kind of put that together for you guys, for me, too. All right, verse 20 through 21. The walls came down, the city was destroyed. So the people shouted when the priest blew the trumpets. And it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat. Then the people went up into the city, every man straight before him. And they took the city, and they destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and donkey. God had given it to them. Israel had to take. God gives, but we must take it from him by obedience. Persistent faith. Verse 22 through 25, finishing the battle. But to the 2 men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, "Go into the prostitute's house," the harlot's house, "and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her." So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and sisters and all who belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and the gold and the vessels of bronze and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab, the prostitute, and her father's household, and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved their lives. And she had and she had lived in Israel in this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Verse 24 states, they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Joshua spared Rahab the harlot, the prostitute. In this, we see a contrast between judgment and salvation. All of Jericho heard about God of Israel, but only Rahab responded positively in faith towards God. With that knowledge, just like us, we have to respond positively through God. We know who He is. Everybody knows who God is, but He saves only the ones who respond positively to Him. So we can learn from the things that mark their victory. Faith. Joshua and Israel believed the battle plan. Obedience. Joshua and Israel followed the battle plan exactly. Courage. Israel followed the battle plan despite danger. Endurance. Israel followed the battle plan over a period of time, even when it seemed that nothing was happening. Israel did not rely on carnal scheming and worldly methods. Their trust was in the Lord, not in human ingenuity. So God wants us to trust Him, not to rely on our worldly thoughts or our worldly experiences that we've gone through, but to trust Him. God wants us to be a part of His victory. He has already given us the battle. It's already been won. And He wants you, He wants me, He wants us to be a part of that victory, that freedom. If you haven't given your life to Jesus, there's no time to wait. It's important. It's life-changing. It's forever. And if you don't want to wait, please come. We're ready. We will accept you. If you want to think about it, you want to talk to one of our elders, it's open during the week. Please come, talk to our elder. This invitation.